Greetings everyone and welcome back to Banners on the Wall.wordpress.com. Anthony here for the latest edition of Banners on the Road. This is the series here on the site where you follow my weird and wonderful winding journey through British ice hockey. And you've got a bit of a mix today. Of course, it is Banners on the Road. It's also a little bit of our mini-series In the Box Thinking, where you get my thoughts from inside the commentary box on a game that I've commentated on. And yeah, we're just going to smash everything together in a bit of a special video piece in a completely different place, not even in front of the hockey shelf this time, in a different part of BOTW Towers. But thank you for joining us for what was last weekend's game. That was from Saturday, the 8th of February, 2025, from the NHL National Division. Final score from the Slough Ice Arena: Berkshire Bees 3, Telford Tigers 5. Goals for the Bees in this one coming from Liam Morris and 2 from Dominic Cabai, one of which was on the power play. And then for the Telford Tigers, goals from David Thompson, 2 from Finley Howes, 1 from Eric Henderson and 1 from Scott McKenzie. This was a bit of an unusual game. I've commentated with Joe Scutts of the Bees and NHL Stats, and previously did a lot of stuff for the Sloan Devils. I've known Joe for a really long time. We first met on a train going from Basingstoke back to Southampton, and it's odd that two people so heavily involved in British ice hockey would live in the same city, which doesn't have an ice rink in it. So Joe and I have travelled around a bunch of different places, some mostly apart, but sometimes together. Usually, if we're both going to Slough at the same time, I'll give Joe a lift. Joe doesn't drive, so he will hop his way across the city to mine, and we'll both pootle on in the Banners Mobile up the M3 and across to Slough. This time Joe was coming from the family of his other half in London, so I had the rather weird and surreal experience of driving the way to Slough by myself. This is why I have a sat-nav. If nothing else, Joe, despite not driving, has an almost photographic memory of where he's going on all the roads, which is incredibly helpful, especially in the dark on the way back. But it was odd to have to find Joe outside the rink because, in spite of the fact that I go to a lot of ice rinks by myself, having not gone to Slough by myself for a very, very long time, it was really weird to have to do that. Fortunately, Joe, and if you've not met Joe, Joe is about 6'2", 6'3", and incredibly hard to miss, appeared, handed me my pass to get in, and we were pretty much away with it. To give you a bit of a different insight, because I've talked about the commentary bits and pieces at Slough before. The commentary position is in an odd place in the corner of the rink at one of the ends, but there was something in the air about this game, and it mostly had come from the fact that a couple of weeks ago we'd had exactly the same game. Now, usually, from a Banners on the Wall perspective, if I'm writing, I try not to go back to back, but having agreed to commentate, that's what happens sometimes. The schedule throws up some unusual bits and pieces, and I think it's relatively clear these two sides don't really like each other a great deal. The game 2 weeks ago had been really, really needly, lots of poking and prodding at each other, and part of me wondered, was I going to get something that I'd never done before? I've been watching hockey for the better part of 20 years, and I've been commentating in bits and pieces now since, well, for the better part of 2 years. I've never commentated on a fight. Handbags, pushing, shoving, all sorts of bits and pieces. But I've never actually commentated on a gloves-off face-punching contest. And it's not necessarily something that I'm like, oh, I really want to commentate on a fight. It's just odd. When I walked into the building that night and walked past both sort of sets of players, there just felt like there was something in the air. Like I said, these two sides, for whatever reason, just don't like each other. And a large chunk of that, I think, is actually because stylistically, when both are playing to their strengths, they're incredibly similar sides, which is really funny because they don't like how the other plays and they don't like how the others approach the game. There is a little bit of, we'll call it gamesmanship for the sake of not swearing on YouTube, but one of the things that had seen the Bees be really successful the weekend before in Swindon was the fact that they had burrowed their way under the Wildcats' skin. Also helped by the fact that the way the Bees set themselves up in such a game, Swindon, as I've talked about before, are really easy to break down, especially for a team like the Bees that can just give up on a forecheck, clog the neutral zone, and stop a team that likes passing and likes putting long stretch passes up the middle of the ice. It's easy enough to put a stick in the lane. Telford don't do that. And actually, that was one of my first big concerns, was having done all my prep and got all the numbers in front of me, where were Telford going to manoeuvre through the Bees, and where were the Bees going to kind of manoeuvre through Telford? The other thing that happened before the game started was, and if you haven't had the opportunity to, I picked up some of the Blindside Trading Card Company's Bees trading cards that have literally just come out. And I should say, I'm not sponsored by anything like that from Blindside, but I did stick a tweet out about it. If you like your hockey trading cards and you want something a bit different, definitely do go check these out, because irrespective of like the fact that the bees are bottom of the table, these are really well put together cards. Chris Callahan, Blue Line Photography's photographs look really good. The cards are really, really good quality. The inserts are fun. I got a signed Dom Goodbye card. That was quite fun. And also as well, in a sport that's not particularly great at its environmental impact, easy open recyclable packaging I think is a really, really neat way of doing these cards, so I think that's really cool as well. And also it's just a different fun bit of merchandise for clubs to get involved with, and where not a lot of National League clubs are doing it, the bees are doing something different. Credits them for that. And if you're interested, definitely do try and pick some up. I think you can buy them through Blindside Trading Cards and do it that way, or you can of course pick them up at the games. They are £4 a pack, so that price point is probably something that might make a few people scratch their heads. But as somebody who's bought a lot of trading cards, and I know a lot of people who bought a lot of trading cards, £4 for a single pack of something quite unique, it's not that bad of a price point. I only picked up 2. I know a few people who picked up quite a few more, so there may be limited supplies going forward with those. But definitely do go and check them out if you're so inclined. The problem with this game, for the most part, was that the bees very clearly, against those sides that like to play really fast, really expansive, quick passing hockey, are able to do it. The bees haven't solved Telford. They just don't seem to know how to. Now, yes, this comes in the context of having won in overtime the next night. But even so, the bees have now lost all 3 of their home games against Telford this season. For whatever reason, at home, they just can't combat whatever brand of road hockey Telford put out. Now, I said it on commentary during the game, and I haven't seen the highlights at this point. They will probably be out on the 12th of February, and I'm recording this on the 11th. But one of the things I said was that when they played a couple of weeks ago, Telford played a very shut down game. Yes, they scored, and yes, obviously they kind of came forward, but a lot of it was very reminiscent of the sort of hockey that sometimes the Solent Devils like to play. Alex Murray talks about the whole idea that Solent operate a game of, you want to win, come break us down. And actually that's what Telford kind of made the bees do. But the issue for the bees was they would kind of not be able to control the middle of the ice and got pushed out to the sides and moved away. But the Tigers didn't massively go forward with a great amount of impetus and just kind of broke and were really clinical. Now the first period was not great in either side's perspective. It was not one of those sort of games that was particularly going into the history books as the greatest game you've ever seen. But as the game progressed, Telford were much more incisive going forward. And that was the really interesting bit about this. As the bees kind of came up the ice, the same thing was happening. Couldn't control the middle, tried to go wide, pushed wide, and didn't really have much of an answer for it. But Telford coming forward had a lot more impetus, drive, and they looked much more dangerous as a result. Now, whether that's because in the last couple of weeks Solway have started to falter, and that 8th place is now much more within Telford's reach. In fact, they're in 8th place as we speak, and actually they need to push games more, because they know if they get points and they get on more of a run, they can start pushing away from Solway. There was one point in the third period that kind of summed up this entire game, where ultimately Telford have just been really, really good at shutting down the Bees' main players. Goodbye, Balaj, Sesenis, who's obviously come in and been really impressive since he's come in as well. But a lot of that sort of top end scoring, Wilsted's got so many goals this year, but just didn't seem to really find a way. And yes, the Bees did score 3 goals in this, and 2 of them did come from Dom Goodbye. But for the majority of it, ultimately the scoreline kind of flatters the Bees. 5-2 might have been more of a fair reflection of kind of the standard of the game itself and the balance of play, but there was a point in the third period where the puck was below the red line and Goodbye and Balaj were both battling for it, being held up by 2, potentially 3, he says, hoping memory serves him well, Tigers players, with Wilsted standing on his own in the slot. That's a problem for the Bees, because your two best players cannot be overly creative in a ball battle down low. And yes, obviously, the premise is there. Win that ball battle, stead in front, ton of confidence, and you hope he'll score, but they weren't winning the ball battles. In terms of the Tigers themselves, the issue came where we were discussing man of the match, and genuinely, you could have just picked a name out of a hat. The thing Telford have gotten really good at, and the thing Tom Watkins seems to generally very good at in general, is one man all in. David Thompson and Eric Henderson have been really impressive since they've come in, and obviously a lot of focus will go on to them. And yes, as well, it's not been a great year for Telford, despite on paper having a really good side. They also turned up with a really deep bench for this. 4 lines, 7D. A couple of weeks ago, they could have only dreamed of that, although that defence does include 2 forwards playing on defence. But there was a lot of everybody kind of going for everything. The Bees tried, just struggled to kind of find a way. But that's kind of been the issue for the Bees this season, is the idea that it doesn't all click at the right time all the time. Previous Saturday, clicked all the time. And then you go into the Sunday game that they lost in overtime to Sheffield, and you can see where the cogs came apart in the machine. In this one, you had some really good moments. The vision of Ollie Hemmings-Mayer, who a lot of people will wonder whether he comes full-time into a National Division side next year or not, will be a question that's out there. I'm more inclined to wonder whether he'll still end up on a 2-way with Slough, but Hemmings-Mayer makes that first goal for the Bees by himself, and it was that little bit of just different thinking. Bit of speed, making sure he's drawn the man across. No one is watching Liam Morris pinch in from the blue line. Textbook goal. And also a really, really good pass from Hemmings-Mayer. People who wonder about some of these younger Slough lads and their ability to step up. Everybody knows of the quality of the Moore brothers and Jack Goodchild and Luke Smittle. Well, some of the others are there too. Jacob Minter, wouldn't surprise me if he's in Swindon full-time next year. And in the same way, I'm pretty convinced that even though potentially being on a 2-way may still help Hemmings-Mayer in that kind of learning how to command and control a game element, might help him a bit. I venture a National League team will take a chance on him full-time for 25-26. Where does it all go right for Telford? They were just allowed to play their game. The Bees didn't challenge them enough. The Tigers kept control of the middle lane coming up the ice, and bar a couple of minor wobbles, it was relatively easy pickings. Like I said, hard to choose a man of the match for them because that's what happens when everybody kind of goes all in. The one thing to mention about Telford, Josh Crawley. So Josh Crawley is obviously being very, very highly talked about, has this sort of 3-way contract between Blackburn, Telford and the Manchester Storm, and he was on what was a very odd-looking 4th line alongside Edgar Landsbergs, who'd been out of the roster and then come back in, and one of the Price boys. And I'm desperately, you know what? We're not even gonna turn the camera off. We are going to double check on the game sheet, because I have a horrible, horrible habit of doing this. Lucas Price, because Jake Price has got his knee injury. Thank you for that. But yeah, we're going to leave that in because because actually you need to see the fact that people make mistakes. So apologies to the Price boys on that one. But yeah, so Lucas Price, Eggers Landsberg and Josh Crawley is a 4th line. And you know what? Did its job really well. And having finally seen Josh Crawley with my own 2 eyes, kid looks good. Kid looks really legit. Supposedly has actually now managed to get himself hurt, which, if true, really sorry to hear, because clearly a big, big talent, and I think he will more than likely be back with Telford next year, and he will probably be full-time. And actually, you know what? A guy like Tommy Watkins, who's generally quite good at working with those younger guys to bring him up and through, giving him good, solid sort of middle 6 minutes next year, this kid could have a really, really good chance at a decent future and pushing on as well. Obviously, Manchester will have a say in that too. But really, really interested to see what happens. But certainly, having spoken to Graham Hamilton from the Blackburn Hawks sort of media bits and pieces, they're not convinced that they get him back next year. And having seen him, pretty certain he'll get a good crack at the National Division next year too. Really good. In terms of the Bees, the man of the match went to Max Wright, because Max Wright did Max Wright things. having been around for the last season of the Elite League for the Basingstoke Bison, when the Bison were truly awful and did not win a game after Christmas, we had Kevin Reiter. And Max Wright might just be the new age Kevin Reiter, where everything that comes at him is just, he pulls off wonder save after wonder save because he has to. And it's a lot to do for a goalkeeper. My worry for the Bees is I think there will be clubs, and not just clubs who have import netminders now, there will be people having discussions with Max Wright as to what he does. And hopefully, from a Bees perspective, if you're a Bees fan, you want Max back because he will believe in the project and kind of what's going on there. But ultimately, you got to enjoy what you got while you got it, because the nature of hockey underneath the NHL is transient and people move around. But boy, does Max Wright have to move around in his crease. He made a string of ridiculous saves. Clearly a keeper that likes being busy. People will say, oh, imagine what he'd be like with a really good defence in front of him. I do wonder whether he would struggle, mostly because he's so good at being busy. And some keepers like a bit of action. Nobody likes to be stood out there doing nothing, twiddling their thumbs. But I wonder, because Reiter in the Elite League, after the Bison left the Elite League, he went to Sheffield and Newcastle. Admittedly, he played with a torn groin. Never a great plan. But he struggled with a really good defence in front of him because the shots that got through were of such a high calibre that he ended up giving up 2-3 goals, but only facing 20 shots. And sometimes actually keepers are just better when they have a defence that kind of lets more through, because that's how they work. It's no bad thing. Ultimately, for the end of the season, the Bees are very much on the outside looking in towards the playoffs, whereas Telford are fighting for their lives. Them and Solway and potentially Romford, if Romford's league form dips, are two spots for 3 teams. Because I am not convinced Bristol have quite got enough in them to claw themselves back in. I think the Bees are a little too far out to claw themselves back in. So I think watching Telford going forward is going to be really, really interesting, because they are playing playoff hockey now, a month from the end of the regular season, 5-6 weeks from the end of the regular season. The Bees are playing for pride at this point, and I think ultimately, given their propensity to like to throw spanners in the works, and they have thrown spanners in the works of teams, we will see what the Bees are able to generate. So ultimately, at the end of this one, game ends, everyone's sort of huffing and puffing a little bit. There was a bit of a incident at the end of the first period where both on and off the ice there was a lot of shouting at each other, but after a pretty accidental hit, it was an accidental hit, it was just 2 guys unaware of what they were doing on, and goodbye just goes through Rhodes Mitchell King, and it kind of took the stuffing out of the game a little bit, or at least in the sense of everybody wanting to punch everybody else. So whilst it came close, still not called a fight. Funny that. Suppose we'll see what happens this coming Sunday when I'm back in Slough with Joe for the Bees and the Solway Sharks. Had to cut there because an ambulance went right past the window and ruined the recording. That's the end of that though. Bannersonthewall.wordpress.com, your number one source for all things related to the NIHL. Check out the website for Banners on the Road, for hockey stories, for all of that good stuff, as well as our free to download tabletop game Dice Hockey. And then of course, YouTube. Wednesday nights, 8 PM live on the YouTube channel, the BOTW What's Current stream, where we go through all 5 divisions of the NIHL structure. Tons to get involved with on the channel as well. Interviews, game reports, all sorts. Subscribe to the channel, like the video, trying to get more subscribers. Share bits and pieces out. Algorithm hamster, keep them happy, fat and fed. If we do not see you Wednesday night, remember, of course, you can catch up at any stage of the What's Current stream. And we will see you lot on Sunday with Joe on Berkshire Bees TV for the Bees versus the Solway Sharks. Be happy. If you can't be happy, then please be safe. As my friend Scott Walls would say, take care of yourself and somebody else. For bannersonthewall.wordpress.com, this is Anthony Russell saying stay safe, and so long till next time.